Hey, what's up, Relevant Church? It's Pastor Muta, and I just wanted to share some supplemental teaching on Elijah. We've been studying through Elijah through the Seasonal Survival Kit series that has been providing us a toolkit or surviving the seasons. Many of us, when the seasons change, depression, anxiety kind of leans in through seasonal affective disorder. And much like Elijah, maybe we've been going through a good season. The summer has been a good season. The fall has been a good season. And then winter hits, holidays hit, and all of these emotions, these feelings begin to draw us down, draw us back. And we want to go and hide in a cave and tell God, listen, I'm just done. I give up. I want to get out of Dodge. Save me from myself, essentially. And so this series has been really impactful to me personally, and I know it's been impactful to you guys because I've received the text messages, the phone calls, the emails. People have stopped me in church after the message with tears in their eyes, just sharing how this message has impacted them. But I want to go back to the beginning of this story of Elijah, how he got to the place where he was at. So I want to lean in on actually the encounter that he has with Ahab and the children of Israel and the prophets of Baal and the Asherah, and how God shows up in a miraculous way because of the faith of the Israelites in that moment. I know I've just talked about the Israelites being faithless, but listen, you're going to see some really awesome testimonies of what God can do when we are obedient, when we want to step out in faith and believe that he can do the miraculous even in our mess. So the beginning of the story happens when Ahab and Jezebel take power of Israel, the nation of God. They draw everybody into pagan worship. They start worshiping false gods. They don't want anything godly. They don't want anything that represents the God of heavens and earth in their town. They've ransacked the nation of any good thing that God is giving them, to any practice that is God has given them to build their faith and build their community. They are just out for themselves. And this ticks off Elijah. Elijah is a prophet. He is a friend of God. He's used by God. And so Elijah shows up on the scene. He says, listen, I don't like what's going on. I think you guys are totally wrong. I think you guys are way out of line. And because you guys are way out of line, this is my promise to you. It will not rain. There will be a drought in Israel until I say so. And so this is what happens. Elijah comes boldly and he says, I don't like what's happening and I'm going to do something about it. And I would love for us to learn a lesson just even in this moment of how Elijah steps up when God's name is being profaned, when God's name is being misused. He's got this holy indignation that shows up that says, I cannot stand for this. And I wouldn't challenge you and I to be able to be that bold to stand up when God's name is profaned and say, like, listen, I'm not going to stand for this. This is not cool. This is not the way things should be. So as the story goes on, there's a drought in the land, and the drought is incredibly severe. It is so bad. There's no water coming down. There's no dew. There's no rain coming down. There's no dew on the ground. I mean, it is a barren land. Animals are dying. People are not being able to survive because of the water. And so in chapter 5 of chapter 18, Ahab says this to Obadiah, one of his servants. He says, and Ahab said to Obadiah, go through the land to all the springs of the waters and to all the valleys. Perhaps we may find grass and save the horses and the mules alive and not lose some of the animals. So they divided the land between them to pass through it. Ahab went in one direction by himself, and Obadiah went in another direction by himself. Listen, they're like, we've got to find grass. We've got to find water somewhere. So now they're traveling. They're going long distances just to go find springs of water, go to find rivers. And they're out on this voyage to try to get some water in the land because it's dry. Everybody's thirsty. Everybody's dying. And can I just say right now, real quick, that whenever God's presence leaves an area, whenever God brings judgment to an area, whenever people turn their backs on God, it turns into a dry and thirsty land. We can't live. We don't understand why things are going the way they are. Many times God has removed his presence and he's like, man, listen, if you would just turn back to me, if my people who are called by my name will will humble themselves and turn from their wicked ways, the Bible tells us. He says, then I will heal their land. Then I'll hear their prayers. And so that's really what's happening right now. And so Elijah shows back up on the scene. It's dry. There's no water. Everybody is dying. Everybody is thinking this is it. This is the end of it all. And in chapter 1 of verse 18, it says, after many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. It says, so Elijah went out to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria. It's just a bad deal out there. And so what happens? Elijah goes and he shows up to Ahab and he says, listen, Ahab, I got to show you who's boss. I've got to show you that the guys that you're following, that the prophets that you have ministering to you guys are false prophets. So this is what I want you to do. I want you to gather all of the prophets, 450 prophets of Baal, 400 prophets of the Asherah. I want you guys to get some bulls. Give me one bull. You guys take one bull. I want you guys to create an altar. I want you guys to stack it up. I want you guys to chop up the animals, throw them on there, and then I want you guys to start praying to your gods. And if your God shows up, he is going to cause fire to come down from heaven and consume the sacrifice. And so they did so. The 850 prophets come together. They get the bull. They chop it up. They create an altar. They start praying to their God, and nothing is happening. In that moment, Elijah is taunting them. He says, maybe your God's asleep. Maybe your God is using the bathroom. Cry louder, pray louder. These guys are cutting themselves. Nothing literally is happening. And so Elijah says, okay, you guys have done everything that you needed to do. You're bleeding. Your people are dying because there's no fire coming down from heaven. And so let me give it a shot. Let me call on my God. Let me call on the God of heaven and the earth. Let me call on the creator, the King of Kings. So he goes and he gathers some stones and he creates this altar. And then he goes and he chops up the bull and he places the bull onto the altar. And then he does something absolutely ludicrous. He does something absolutely crazy. In verse 30, he says, then Elijah said to all the people, come near to me. And all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones, and according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he made a trench about the altar as great as would contain 2 seahs of seed. It would contain a great amount of seed. And he put the wood in the order and cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. Now, here's the part that I don't want you to miss. Here's the part I want you to understand and to hear. In verse 33, it says, and he put the wood in order and cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, fill 4 jars with water. What? Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering of the wood. There's no water in the land. Where are they getting the water from? Literally, people have traveled miles and miles to go get water for their families, to go get water for the nation. And so this water is a hot commodity. No one is just giving up water. Water is literally the most precious thing on earth for those people. No one wants to give up the water, but the people bring it. And he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. And the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with water. Listen, there was very little water in the land. For them to give up that much water, bulls are not small. Bulls are not little sheep. Bulls are not little goats. I mean, bulls are big animals. And the altar had to be big. And for it to be saturated, to be soaked down to the bones with water, imagine how much water they had to bring. Imagine how much water they had to pour on that animal. And let me tell you what's happening. I mean, before I say that, think about what you would be thinking if you were there. If you're looking at people waste all of this water, literally you would be like, what are you doing, Elijah? You've lost your mind. How can you waste all this water, right? But here's what was happening. Let me tell you what was happening. Would the people have the faith to sacrifice a little to gain an abundance? So Elijah comes back and says, listen, God is planning to bring water back to the land. But this is what you have to do. You have to trust that God is a provider. You have to trust that God is the giver of good things, that God gives good gifts to those people who love him and who follow him. And so he says, will you trust God with your resources? Will you trust God with the hottest commodity of the land? Will you trust God with the thing that keeps you alive? He's simply asking them, would the people have enough faith to sacrifice a little to receive an abundance? Let me say it like this. Elijah was calling them to give up what was most precious to receive what was most needed. Elijah was asking them to give up what was most precious to receive what was most needed. And so what happened here? In verse 36, it says, and at the time of the offering of the oblation, the sacrifice, the sacrificial offering, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I've done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that these people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. And in verse 39, it says this, and when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. What is so important about this story is that the miracle showed up when the people showed out in faith. When the miracle showed up, when the people showed out in faith through their sacrifice. See, listen, what Elijah was calling them to do is have faith. What Elijah was calling them to do is trust God. Give up the very thing that's in your hand to receive an abundance so that the entire land would be blessed. Give up what's in your hand. Give up what you're holding on to so that the entire land could be blessed by your sacrifice. So the entire land, you will be blessed. Your children will be blessed. Your neighbors will be blessed. The entire nation would be blessed. Verse 41. I want to read this right here. He says, and Elijah said to Ahab, go up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of the rushing of rain. What they gave up in faith, they received in abundance. What they gave up in faith, they received in abundance. And I believe there's a lesson for you and I in this today. What are you lacking? What is in your life right now that you are lacking? That you go to sleep at night, I don't have enough of this. Is it your time? I just don't have enough time in the day. I don't have enough resources. I don't have enough resources to do what I want to do. What are you lacking? Maybe you're lacking it because you have not submitted it by faith for God to use for his glory. Maybe you're lacking it because you have not submitted it by faith for God to use for his glory. See, we live in a world that values time. I need boundaries. I need time. We hold on to time. Time is so precious. And we say time is money, time costs, time is everything. And so for many of us, time is something that we hold as a hot commodity. Why? Because we go to work every single day. Some of us, we're in school all day. Some of us are in school and we work all day. So it's hard to sacrifice that time. It's hard to give up that time. And many times the church calls on you to give up some of your time and say, hey, Sunday mornings exist for the empty seats. Sunday mornings are for us to pour out as God pours in to the people that are walking in the doors. God's prodigal sons and daughters are coming in. So we want to set the table. We want to make sure that we give up our time, that we sacrifice our time to be redeemed by God for his glory. And sometimes it's resources. We say, hey, listen, there's a need in the church, or God has called us to be on mission, and there's a community out there. In our city, there's 6,000 people just in the city of Niles. That's not talking about the surrounding regions. I'm not including Granger, South Bend, Mishawaka. There's thousands and thousands of people who have yet to say yes to Jesus. And so we call on people and say, hey, God is inviting you to invest in the kingdom. God is inviting you to be a part of his greatest move in somebody's life. And it's so easy for us to want to hold on and just say, you know what? I just don't have the time. I can't get to church early Sunday morning. I can't stay all day Sunday morning. What if God is inviting you and saying, will you trust me and bring your time to the altar? Will you sacrifice your time on the altar and watch me do something miraculous with your time? Watch me redeem your time in ways that you had never expected. Or maybe it is your resources. Maybe it is God saying, will you trust me in giving to my mission? Will you trust me in sowing a seed so that it can grow into a fruit in people's lives, so that my people will be blessed, so that the land will be blessed? Will you trust me that I am your giver, that I am your provider, that if you sacrifice your resources on the altar of obedience, sacrifice your resources on the altar of faith, that I will be more than able to give you back 100-fold what you've provided? Or maybe it's your talent. Maybe you're good at something and you're just like, maybe I just don't have the time to use my talent. Maybe I don't feel like my talent is good enough. Maybe I don't feel like my talent is worthy enough. Maybe God is saying, would you take your talent and place it on the altar of sacrifice? Will you place your talent on the altar of faith and watch me do something miraculous through it? Hey, I want to share this with you guys. God dares us to submit these things to him by faith. Not begrudgingly, not reluctantly, but with faith, to know what we sow, we shall reap. What does the word says? Give and it shall be given to you, full measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, but only if we give it by faith. Do you believe that God can use your time and provide you an abundance of time? Do you believe that God can use your resources and provide you an abundance of resources that are going to bless you, bless your household, and bless everybody else? Do you believe that God can use your talent? Remember, there's a story in scripture. I'll just say this real quick. These guys were given talents. One was given 5 talents, another was given 2 talents, another was given 1 talent. The one who had 5 talents said, hey, I'm going to use it, I'm going to flip it, and he made 10 talents. The other one who had 2 talents, he says, hey, I'm going to use it, I'm going to flip it, I'm going to make 4 talents. But the guy who had 1 talent, who was looking at himself as like, I'm unworthy, I'm not that good, kept his talent, and he ended up losing that talent. God invites us, God dares us to submit these things to him by faith. He wants us to give them, trusting that he is a God who gives good gifts to those who trust him, who diligently seek him, and have faith in him. I want to read one last verse for you. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6 says this, and without faith, it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Hey, can I give you one last challenge? Give up what's most precious so that you can receive what's most desired. or needed. God knows all of your needs. God knows all of your desires. But maybe it's going to take you having the faith to give up what's in your hand to receive the promise and the fulfillment of His blessing. The miracle is realized by faith through sacrifice. Will you step out on faith? Will you use your time? Will you use your talent? Will you use your treasure to see God's name be glorified? I believe that if you do so, God will respond in favor to you. You step out in faith, and God will respond in favor. Hope you guys have a great Saturday. I cannot wait to see you tomorrow morning. God bless.